divorced or single as a marginal group.
I guess you have to add them up.
Yeah, but let's see how you did.
Doesn't add up, right?
I mean, we're not adding these numbers in the middle, we're just adding how many we checked on each side.
Yes. So how did you do? Did you know you were privileged if you had any that were privileged?
When you break it down like that, I could see how it could be characterized as privilege when people tend to pick you over something else. Like I know that because of a weight issue, that there may be a preference for someone who is smaller. Yeah. But you know, and depending on where you are and who you are, they may prefer someone who is larger.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just like, I'm going to go back to an academic setting because that's what I'm familiar with. There was always a class within academics. So you've got your administrators, and then you have your certified personnel, and then your classified personnel. And so the classified personnel would be on the bottom run, then the teachers because they have degrees. And then
So it's
it
the
goes to-
educational status.
That's right.
That makes you privileged?
Well, some folks think that makes you privileged.
In different
But sometimes
settings,
different
in different
settings,
settings, different things make you privileged.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, but as she was saying, in an academic setting, we have this discussion, we've had this discussion before about the whole academia piece, about people being privileged over people who do not have degrees versus people with degrees.
And they treat them differently.
They do.
They're treated differently.
And
But if you work in a factory, if you have experience and knowledge that other people don't possess, you get privileges because of that.
And just for the sake of discussion, that's not always true. Even though on my machine I have 30 years of experience working at Goodyear, you may have a manager that comes in, has no experience, but because he has a degree,
Yeah.
he's going to come to where I'm at and try to explain to me or tell me what I need
How
to
to do your
do.
job.
All right.
But he doesn't have the experience, and where I should have that privilege, because he has a degree, he feels he can come over and tell me, yet having no experience at the machine whatsoever.
He's entitled
So,
to.
He
He
needs
feels
yeah.
entitled
Yeah.
to do that, but you know, the fact is, you know,
A
knowledge
system has
should.
empowered him to.
Sure.
Although he may
You're
not,
right.
like you said, he may not know diddly.
Right, and a lot of them don't know diddly. No, seriously, but yeah,
Yeah.
to your point, exactly, yes.
I've always thought too that the person who is in a position of authority, the only difference between that person who's up here and the part-time custodian is their level of responsibility. They put their pant legs on one at a time, just like I do.
Right.
You know? So what needs to happen, I feel like, is the person who's a part-time custodian needs to feel empowered enough to be able to sit at the table and be heard like anybody else. Should that opportunity ever come to him. Chances are it probably won't. But he shouldn't allow anybody to run over him.
And even within higher ed, there's different levels of education because you know, those that have PhDs look upon people that with masters or bachelors or with no degrees
Yeah.
as less than.
Substandard.
Yeah. So even within higher ed, I see that playing out of those that have a higher educational privilege. And then back to your question about the marital status, do you see benefits for those that are legally married in a heterosexual, how they would have benefits that exceed those that are people that are single and divorced or that are in same-sex marriages or partnerships?
To me, some of this stuff right here is what I would consider like a stereotype. How others view those people, because you could be in a heterosexual marriage, 2 parents in the house, and it could be as dysfunctional or more dysfunctional than a single parent household with a mother and 10 kids. So that's stereotypical to me. A lot of these things are how people see other people.
Well, and for me, it goes back to, I think that the race piece is the strongest on this privilege and marginalized. The race, and I would probably say the sex, or the sex assigned at birth, would probably be the 2 top ones, where you really see it playing out in every day with the race as well as the sex assigned at birth.
And I would agree. I would agree with you on those things, because those are things that people can't change. If you're born poor, you can maybe through luck or happenstance find a way to improve your lot in life to become financially successful. But if you're born black, you ain't changing that. If you're born a female, you're not changing that. So some of these things you can't change. So if you get a privilege because of that, then that's an area to be concerned about.
Only to disagree with you, women do change, have sex
Right.
changes. So I mean, but to your point,
Yeah.
I know what you're saying. Right, right.
There's been some studies lately on this work style, because they're finding out now that introverts have just as much ability as extroverts to lead groups. And it used to be, like sometimes in workplaces, they would overlook people that are introverts because they would think they're not good leaders, because they're quiet, they don't say anything, so they wouldn't let them go to trainings and different things. But they're finding out now that introverts have just as much to bring to the table as extroverts.
And I would think that some of these things that are under extrovert might be under introvert, because introverts are people who tend to be somewhat analytical, somewhat deeper thinkers.
Right, they think
Yeah,
deeply
so,
on.
and I would think that like extroverts would be like kind of creative people. They're out there just telling people stuff, just a little.
I think they're creative.
I want to go back to something Nick was saying earlier. When you look at this list is primarily used to label people and label, whatever it is you do in life. You put labels on people, so it feels like it makes it easier for you to comprehend or communicate with individuals if you can label them, which is not always true. But that's but when you look at this, that's all of these are as well. You're black. Well, we see you're black, but that's a label. Comes to the stereotype, which you also had mentioned earlier, automatically comes in there. Degrees, there's a label and a stereotype that goes with that as well. So when you look at this list, their labels, I guess it makes it easier for people to identify who you are, which is not always, because how can you tell, between an extrovert and, just like you just said, about between an extrovert and introvert.
But sometimes there's boxes created to put you in. And I know that when I got my divorce, during a parent-teacher conference, a white teacher had the audacity to tell me, don't expect much from your children because they come from a typical black family, single-head of household. And I don't know if she was telling me that for her benefit or for mine, but it didn't work for my end of it.
So how did you respond to that?
I didn't respond to that. I responded to my children. Later on, when my son was in college, I saw her at the town that his college was in, and she said, "What are you doing down here?" Just holding a conversation. I said, "He's working on his second degree," and I wanted to stick my tongue out at him. But he's working on his second degree. This is the one that you told me that not to expect much from him because he comes from a typical black family single-handed household.
I think a lot of these
You
things
know.
right here kind of create biases in people.
Mhm.
I think one of the things about diversity and and to me, diversity is just basically understanding differences. And before you can understand differences of other people, you need to understand your own differences and your own biases, because
Wow.
that's what we take into when we look at anybody.
Mhm.
We come from where we are, and we look at people and we start placing judgment. If I'm thin and skinny, I'm assuming that a big man like me, he ain't taking care of himself, he don't really care and stuff like that. You know, that's a bias that person has.
Right.
And in order for us to truly be inclusive, before we start projecting our thoughts on that person, we need to get to know them. And that's the key to diversity and inclusion, is meeting people on an individual basis and opening the dialogue of communication, because that's where we learn about other people. We're not going to learn about it just reading a list and stuff. We need to talk to other people. We need to get to know them and take some time with them.
I agree.
So when it comes to race, though, people shy away from that subject.
Because it's difficult to do. It's difficult to talk about race.
But I have,
Because
go ahead.
I was just gonna say, when I've talked about privilege before, you bring this up in a group that's more diverse than our group, and you start talking about white privilege. Just the mention of that word sets a lot of people back on their heels. Oh, you're saying I'm white, I'm privileged, okay, but I don't feel that way. And you may not, but because of the color of your skin, historically you've been privileged all of your life.
Right.
And you benefited from that privilege, whether you have actually sought it out or not. You've always benefited from the fact that you're white. You can't deny that. But it still makes people uncomfortable when you start having those kind of conversations.
And when you, for instance, someone goes to, a black athlete goes to school, but he goes on an academic scholarship. But what is the assumption that he goes to college on is because you got here because you've got a scholarship to play sports.
Right.
So when my son was going to school, he said, "Why is it ask all the white kids what their major is and ask us what sport we play?" So then I taught him to say, "Well, I'm down here on an academic scholarship." But I put that ball back in his court and said, "You have to set him straight. You know, I'm down here on an academic scholarship. That basketball scholarship or football scholarship is my means of paying my way through school.
Correct.
But I got an academic scholarship just like you did."
Right.
White people are and some are in denial, and they do not want to accept the fact that they do have privilege.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just so they don't want to have the discussion.
That's why it's difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, you can't talk to someone that does not want to talk to you or talk about this subject matter.
And they can sit around this table and just be there and nod at you occasionally and be like, shut you down. And the first time you said that thing about white privilege, they ain't heard nothing else you said. They're playing in their golf game or doing whatever comes next later in the day.
Well, you know, and as an example, just this past Sunday, my priest is Hispanic. And so he got on this topic, and most of it was because of President Trump and what he's doing to the immigrants. Little does he know that everybody here is an immigrant except for the Native Americans, but everybody else are immigrants, including him. He may not want to agree with that. But what Father was saying was that, and I'm the only black in church. I go to a Catholic church, I'm only black there, and there's probably about a third Hispanic because he's Hispanic. More came in, but the majority of the parishioners in that church were white. And so he said, "How do you think you got what you have?" Silence. He said, "You took it. You took it like you take everything else. When people don't look like you look, don't speak like you speak, don't eat what you eat, there's something wrong with them, and